This is a story about how the first African American boxing heavyweight champion, Jack Johnson, was charged for crimes and ended up in prison. But was he justly charged? Watch on to find out. By the early 1900s, Jack Johnson was in his early 20s and had risen through the ranks as a formidable boxer in the heavyweight category. Known to march by no one's drum but his own, confident, arrogant, admired by and equally despised by many. He was known for his expensive suits and even had his front teeth capped in gold. He settled initially with a sporting woman, an African American prostitute, and moved into an all-white neighborhood to the chagrin of many, but he was unmoved. This was before he became heavyweight champion. This was around 1903. At the time, no white heavyweight champion would give Jack Johnson an opportunity for a fight, not to mention the heavyweight title. So he kept fighting all the black fighters that came his way, and he beat them all. As time passed, his lover left him for a friend of his, and he now started to hang out with white sporting women, with white prostitutes. And a lot of people were not pleased about that. By 1908, boxer Tommy Burns, the heavyweight champion at the time, who had drawn the collar line and had refused to fight Jack Johnson, eventually agreed to fight him for a prize of $30,000, and the fight was set in Sydney, Australia. Jack Johnson defeated Tommy Burns at the age of 30 and after 14 years as a boxer. It was a proud moment for African Americans in the United States of America. After Jack Johnson's win in Australia, the knowledge that he was traveling with a white woman affected how he was viewed by both blacks and whites alike. Now in Chicago, the Everly Club was an exclusive bordello, all white only, and Jack Johnson was barred, of course. But he had his manager get him in, and he ended up taking 3 of the workers home that night for happy fun times, and he would end up taking 6 more home in the next few months. The year was 1909. All the 9 people he took home ended up losing their jobs from the club. Another young white lady, a 23-year-old named Belle Shriver, was an addition to his entourage that included another white lady named Hattie. And he was now traveling with 2 white women, and people were looking and talking and talking and looking. But Jack Johnson didn't care. Fast cars, sporting women, any woman of his choice, regardless of her color. Jack Johnson had it all. He was calling all the shots. He would later meet up with another white lady, Etta Duryea, who would become his wife and a third of his entourage that would continue to travel with him and to create a buzz everywhere he went. Jack Johnson continued to take up contenders, both black and white now, and he beat them all. This was 1909, towards the end of the year. The retired former heavyweight champion Jim Jeffries was the great white hope, as he was named at the time, to take the belt back from Jack Johnson. Initially he was skeptical, but for $100,000, the price was right. Jim Jeffries came out of retirement on July 5th, 1910, at Nevada. Johnson would go on to win the boxing match, defeating Jim Jeffries, handing Jim Jeffries his only loss. There were riots and confrontations in various states and cities across the country. There was wide-reaching discontent by the win. There was a feeling at the time that they couldn't beat him in the ring, so they would try to beat him somewhere else. They would take on his sex life that involved multiple relationships with white women. Back at Chicago, Jack Johnson opened his very own nightclub he called Café de Champion that included portraits of his wife Etta. At this time, Etta was feeling very isolated, very depressed, and she felt that she was unliked by both blacks as well as whites. She often said, "Here I am, a white woman, and I have to sort of hide myself away from people." She was very frustrated and she took herself out. And during that period, Jack Johnson was very, very sad. He was almost inconsolable about what had occurred. And even the people around him that didn't like him felt for him during this time. A few months after, Jack Johnson met up with a new companion, a 19-year-old, Lucille Cameron, and she was also a prostitute and at the time, and he started sort of going out with her at that time. Now, her mother got to find out about the relationship when she came to town and did not like what she was seeing, so she reported Jack Johnson to the police, and she indicated that Johnson had abducted her daughter. On the 18th of October 1912, Jack Johnson was arrested based on the Mann Act that barred the transportation of women interstate for the purposes of prostitution and or debauchery. Following the arrest, next his Café de Champion's license was revoked and the cafe's doors shut permanently. They branded him undesirable. Lucille Cameron wouldn't testify against Jack Johnson. So the authorities had to keep looking, and they searched around the country where they could find another woman who could testify against him. And they didn't have to look far before finding one of his ex-lovers, Miss Belle Schreiber. With Jack Johnson free pending the beginning of the trial, he found time to get married to Lucille Cameron in December 1912. During the trial, Jack Johnson took to the stand and he denied everything he was asked, and he held his own. On the other hand, his ex-lover, Belle Schreiber, took to the stand and she agreed and testified against him and said that he transported her across state lines for prostitution. And so she sealed the deal in his disfavor. The jury was out just a very short time, and he was found guilty, and he was sentenced to 1 year in prison. The date was June 4, 1913. He was free pending appeal, and he found a way to slip out of the United States and enter Canada. There are different stories about the actual reason or how he found his way out of the United States into Canada. One of them being that there was some exchange between his management and the authorities to permit this to somehow occur. When he got to Canada, his wife Lucille was already there, waiting for him, and they started a life outside America that was to be the case for many, many years. From Canada, he ended up in Europe with Lucille and took advantage of the fame he had at the time to make some money doing exhibition fights and all types of other appearances. He was now a fugitive, making the best out of things in Europe along with Lucille. Back in the United States, they kept looking for someone that would defeat Jack Johnson, and the latest was Jess Willard. In Havana, the fight was set. Jess Willard would take on Jack Johnson. Jess Willard was 27 years old at the time, and Johnson was 37 years old. Johnson was not in shape for the fight, but he expected to win. So on the 5th of April 1915, the fight was on, and Jess knocked out Jack Johnson in the 26th round. After the fight, Jack Johnson would return to Europe along with Lucille, who was at the fight, And Jess Willard returned to the United States of America a hero for having brought the belt back to what they called its rightful place. At this time, Jack Johnson was getting tired of being in exile. As the years went by, he started to get tired of being outside the United States and he wanted to return home. So after 7 years in exile, he was itching to return. And the anticipation at first was that during the Jess Willard match, there would be some sort of arrangement for him to return to the United States, but it didn't quite occur as was intended. So the story goes. In 1920, he agreed to return to the United States of America to serve his time. Lucille was still with him at this time. He was happy to be back in the United States, and about 500 people were waiting for him when he returned. And the story is that they offered to drive him to the prison to surrender, and he said, "No, let me drive." So he drove himself to be arrested. Jack Johnson was in good spirits, and he started to serve his sentence. He left prison after under a year at the age of 43 on the 9th of July 1921. When he was released from prison, Lucille was there waiting for him again. He went on to keep fighting here and there in exhibitions, his skills not being what they used to be, but being happy to still impart the knowledge of boxing and still show himself here and there. He unfortunately passed away in 1946 at the age of 68 after a car accident in which he was driving with a friend. The friend got thrown from the vehicle and survived, but he ended up dying after being taken to the hospital. What a legacy Jack Johnson left. The first African American heavyweight champion of the world who took on the world on his own terms at a time that it would almost have been impossible, maybe for some others, to even have contemplated some of the things that Jack Johnson did. He will always be remembered. Thank you very much for checking our channel out again today and hanging on this long to listen to this presentation on Jack Johnson. Till next time, take care.